Huge welcome to everyone who's joined us this evening for this session on the American elections. I'm not going to do much talking, you'll be pleased to hear, because we've got three fantastic guests joining us. Most of you will know the work of Carole Cadwalladr, who is, among other things, a Hartford graduate, but that's not all. That's the most important thing from our perspective, but she's also gone on to win the Orwell Prize, to be nominated for a Pulitzer for her work on big tech in the US and beyond. If you haven't seen The Great Hack on Netflix, don't go and watch it now, please, but do go and watch it in just over an hour's time, which really focuses on her extraordinary courage in her investigative journalism. Also, two other old friends, Josh, not old in the sense of being very old, but old in terms of going back a while. Josh Earnest, who worked with Barack Obama really throughout his time as president, culminating in being his chief of communications, I think 2014 to 2017, in the final years of the Obama presidency. And it seems a long time ago now. So Josh is very kindly joined us tonight. Thank you to Josh. And then Patrick Davies. Patrick and I worked in various different incarnations together in British diplomacy before Patrick was the #2 in the embassy in Washington. Was there for some of those Obama years and then some of the Trump years as well. So also saw those presidential transitions in action. And it's just brought out. Please do buy Patrick's new book, The Great American Delusion, written in a camper van, or a caravan. Sorry, Patrick, I think it was a caravan. But that helps to unpack many of the myths that we in the UK and elsewhere tend to carry when we come to consider what's going on in America. And then I'm Tom Fletcher, if you haven't met me already, currently at Hartford College here. My angle into this conversation was that I was in Downing Street as the foreign policy person in various different eras of the US-UK relationship. I was there for Blair Bush, for Brown Bush, for Brown Obama, and then for Obama Cameron. So I saw different versions of this US-UK relationship. Now, we didn't want to do this straight after the election because we felt we wanted the dust to settle before we brought in these extraordinary experts to help us understand what was happening. I fear that even 2 weeks on, the dust hasn't yet settled, not least because Donald Trump, as ever, a man determined to prove his critics right, is not letting the final bit of dust settle on this election. But maybe if we start with Josh, out there on the ground in the US, can we yet breathe a sigh of relief and feel this election is over and prepare for President Biden?
It's good to see you, Tom, and thanks for giving me a chance to be a part of this. It's really, I'm pleased to be part of this panel, so thanks for the chance. And it's good to see everybody for jumping on, so thanks for being a part of this. I do think the dust is settling, but we're still in the phase of active settling. And primarily, Tom, it has to do with sort of Donald Trump's ability to accept the outcome, but it also has to do with the Republican Party no longer covering for Trump. And slowly but surely, their willingness to do so is fading away. And every day you read new quotes from the newspaper with establishment Republicans saying, offering some bit of cover to Trump, saying, well, he should pursue his legal rights to raise questions about the election if he has any evidence. But there's a growing expectation, and more of them are willing to admit this, that Joe Biden will be inaugurated in January. So that's the real dynamic, I think, that's most important is, while Trump is obviously at the center of this and will be until he leaves the White House, the willingness of the rest of the other instruments of the Republican Party to cover for him is slowly dissipating. And that's a really important development. The other aspect of this election that is not resolved in any way yet, Tom, is that the control of the United States Senate has not been resolved. There are 2 Senate runoff elections in Georgia, and it's really anybody's guess how that's going to play out. Republicans definitely come to that special election with an advantage. Georgia is historically a Republican state. Republicans have historically done well in historic Republican states during runoffs. But of course, this is a state that Joe Biden just won. So you would have to give some momentum to the Democrats. It's an uncertain outcome, but that will be resolved, hopefully, the first week in January.
Right. Thanks, Josh. So maybe some of us can breathe a sigh of relief and feel that we do have a leader of the free world once again. There is no longer a vacancy for leader of the free world. But maybe, Carole, am I wrong to suggest that President Biden will be filling that vacuum as leader of the free world? Does the US president still do that role?
That feels like a really hard question for me, Tom. As I arrived, I was like, I'm really not sure I'm quite right for this panel, in terms of what I know about. But thank you very much, nonetheless, for inviting me. I mean, I think, we can see how that's been, the legacy of that has been dented over the last 4 years. I mean, I think the thing where I come in is the enormous power, actually, that maybe the US doesn't have in itself, but US companies have around the world. And that's particularly the thing that I focus on, really, is the role of these tech platforms and the completely crucial role they play in every single election and democracy around the world. And I don't know, we have now got a chance, I think, that with a Biden administration, that something could now happen there to bring those companies under control. But I do feel that we are still fundamentally at a very, very dangerous moment. And I don't think that that has gone away. And, maybe there's some sighs of relief, but the fact that the entire information infrastructure has changed and facilitated a Donald Trump and is facilitating Donald Trumps all around the world, that is still in place. The dangers still exist. He is one man, he was an outlier, but actually the sort of system that created him is still very much in place.
I think we have to pause and just say hi to, is it Naomi, Josh?
Yes, Naomi has joined us for at least part of this conversation.
She's very welcome. Hey, Naomi. It's very good to see you. Carole, can I just come back on the tech point? So we didn't, compared to 2016, big tech didn't seem to play such a role in this election. Are big tech celebrating now, or are they worried about losing President Trump?
I mean, the only thing you can say is that the kind of massive scrutiny that has been brought to bear on the tech platforms, which absolutely was not in place in 2016, we very much suspect that has played a role. It has kept some of the worst excesses in check. There is some transparency, but at the same time, it's still not over either. I mean, Trump is still actually in the White House, and these mad conspiracy theories are still being spread on these platforms. The incitement to violence is happening in real time. So I would sort of say, I still think we have to be really, really vigilant, and we can't take the pressure off these tech companies, which are still absolutely amplifying lies, misinformation, and violent threats, every single second of every single day. Sorry, maybe I didn't answer the question though. Apologies. So I've actually forgotten what it was now. Anyway, I shall let somebody else come in. Something much more sensible.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll ask the same question actually. I think you did answer it, right? But I'll ask it to Patrick as well. What you've just been talking to tech companies today. Are they feeling relieved that the Trump era is over? But Joe Biden's not necessarily the most sort of tech savvy US president there's ever been. He's probably the third least tech savvy of recent ones.
Yeah, I mean, the group of tech companies I was talking to in the UK today are not the big social media companies, but I think they are relieved. I know they are relieved that Joe Biden will be moving into the White House in January. And just to say, I really do think he'll move into the White House in January. I suspect Donald Trump will continue to make quite a lot of noise and make that difficult. But, Joe Biden will move into the White House on the 20th of January, and we will have a new president. So yeah, I think there's there's general relief among the business community in the UK and more broadly in the Western world that Donald Trump will no longer be in the White House. But I'm a little bit more skeptical, I have to say, than Carole, that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be able to do very much on constraining the big tech companies. If you look at, there wasn't a huge swing towards the Democrats that many might have expected in the circumstances, partly fueled by the social media companies and all the misinformation and lies that are propagated on their platforms. But that means that, Joe Biden doesn't yet have the Senate and the House, which of course, as Josh mentioned, if the Democrats win those runoff elections in the Senate in Georgia in early January, that makes a difference. But it would be the tiniest of margins. And the reality is, if the big tech companies are going to be taken on, there's going to have to be reaching across the aisle. Something Joe Biden is very good at, by the way. But in a highly polarized society that America is now, I think that's going to be quite challenging. And indeed, Joe Biden's going to have lots of other things on his plate, not least, managing the coronavirus pandemic and rebuilding the US economy as we come out of that. So how much bandwidth there will be to take on some of these really important questions that Carole mentioned, and there are many more that we can talk about. I'm not sure there is going to be that much bandwidth, which is a shame because they need to be dealt with, but that may be the reality of the next 3 or 4 years.
Let's come to Josh on that point on bandwidth then. So what is President Biden going to do with office? Is big tech on his to-do list?
Yeah, look, I think Patrick made a couple of important points. And I think one thing that we all need to be sensitized to here is Donald Trump is going to leave the White House on January 20th, but he's not going to give up his Twitter handle. He's not going to give up the tens of millions of followers. And I think the reason, and I think the tech companies are pretty realistic about that. I think the reason that they are at least slightly relieved is the challenge that they faced is how do we manage the content on our platform that is being put there by the President of the United States? That is in and of itself inherently newsworthy. But once that person is no longer President of the United States and they're just dealing with content that's being propagated by a private citizen, then I think their hand is stronger. The question will be, will they use it? Will they feel less pressure to do that because he's no longer president and they can say, oh, the system worked. We don't have to regulate him that heavily. Or do they say, you know what, now that you're not the president of the United States anymore, you had that cover and we did have a challenge for sort of deciding how we were going to regulate that content. But now that you're a private citizen, you can't incite violence. You can't propagate falsehoods. I think there's a real open question about how they use that opportunity. When it comes to the Biden agenda, I think the reality, Tom, is that right now they are focused like a laser, and for good reason, on containing the spread of COVID-19 and trying to bring along this vaccine and get it widely distributed, not just around the country but around the world. And secondly, a close second, they're very focused on dealing with the economic fallout of the impact of COVID-19 on our economy. So that is where they are focused, and I think rightly so. Where does sort of regulation of these tech platforms fall, I think is something that remains to be seen. It is my own personal view, and I don't know if this is a widely reflected one, but I actually think it would be in the best interest of the tech community to engage with well-meaning, knowledgeable, effective technocrats in the government to come together on some kind of regulatory regime that doesn't 100% satisfy either the government or the tech community, but does give them a much stronger platform on which to operate that would allow them to build public confidence, that would allow them to run their companies in ways that would be much more predictable moving forward. It'd be better for everybody. It'd be better for the companies, it'd be better for the government, and most importantly, it would be better for the users of all these platforms that I think in many ways have been very poorly served by the totally unregulated environment in which they've been currently operating.
So I want to come to Carole to see if she thinks that the tech companies are ready for that kind of conversation. Also, to pick up on this point, Carole, of what we should do about Donald Trump as he moves from being president in chief to being basically troll in chief on Twitter. But first, I just have to check with Josh. You've sat there with the president of the United States discussing how to communicate, how to handle social media. What would you be saying to Joe Biden now? I mean, are we going to see Joe Biden tweeting himself?
Well, I don't know if we'll see Joe Biden treated himself, but I do think Joe Biden has surrounded himself with a digital and social media team that did prove to be pretty sophisticated in the context of the campaign. And the question that they're all facing themselves right now is, how do they translate that from a political oriented organization to a governing oriented organization? And I think they will be focused on doing that right. And primarily because I think they saw how powerful that was. So I don't think they're going to have this figured out on January 20th, but I do think that over the course of the year in 2021, they will sort of figure out how to use those platforms to advance their governing agenda. And I think that'll be really valuable to them. The thing that I was surprised by when I started on the first day in the Obama White House is we also had, for what was at the time was this pretty sophisticated digital and social media operation, but we inherited a White House that had none of that. It had no sort of social or digital presence to speak of. And it took a long time for us to sort of figure out how to build that. And frankly, it basically took us all but 8 years to figure out how to sort of get close to catching up to where the rest of the world is. So the Biden team doesn't have that steep of a hill to climb, but they are going to have to figure out how to take the campaign apparatus that they had from a digital and social perspective that was effective and translate that into a governing environment, because it's different. And how do you motivate people and communicate with people in the same kind of way, inspire them to action, to advance an agenda as opposed to get out the vote, is a different task altogether. And they've got their work cut out for them.
It's fascinating that you feel that when you guys arrived, because we were watching in 2007, 2008, watching the way that campaign used social media at the time. So it's extraordinary that you felt that was behind the rest of the world, because at the time that felt very dynamic, very innovative, and it'd be very interesting to see how many of the old band get back together again now in this White House to try and reinvent that campaigning social media style. But anyway, Carole, what do you reckon? So those two questions then, how are we going to handle as a rogue ex-president Trump on social media? Do we just ignore him like we ignore other trolls, or do we fight back? And then the part B was around whether big tech are actually ready for the kind of conversation that Josh was describing.
So it's fascinating because Trump is going to get kicked off Twitter almost immediately, isn't he? Because if he's treated like a private citizen, he's going to be in breach. The whole point about it is that Twitter, overtly said, well, we can't enforce our normal rules because he is president and it's newsworthy. And, we've seen him inciting violence, essentially, which is against their terms of service. And he's done that on Twitter and he's done that on Facebook, and he's, been left up. So if the privileges of his office go, well, that means essentially he's going to get booted off, I think. And if he gets booted off, he's going to end up on this new platform, Parler, which is, I don't know how much you've been following this. It's the new right wing. It's the new free speech platform in town. And it's completely fascinating to me because, it was this question of who actually is funding Parler? Where has this new platform come from? And it's my old friend, it turns out, the Mercers, Rebecca Mercer, who is the big Trump donor, the family who bankrolled Cambridge Analytica and Breitbart. They're behind it. And so it feels like it's like, not again. We've been here. It's sort of like we've had this 4-year cycle and we seem to have sort of come round full circle. So, so that I think is going to be very, very interesting what plays out there. And then the second part of the question is that, is big tech ready for the conversation? I really hope it's not a conversation. I found one of the most nauseating things which happened just after the election was that picture of Nick Clegg tweeting with himself and Biden, and with this very pally, oh yes, Biden, when I was deputy prime minister, of course, Biden was the vice president and we know each other well. And this is, there was so much being communicated in that photograph and absolutely none of it good. Because they are, what the big tech companies have done in recent years is they've thrown huge amounts of lobbyists at Washington. Their whole, agenda in Washington and in Europe is to capture the regulatory process and to bend it to their will. And, you know, I think the real signs of hope are actually much more around the antitrust investigations, which is these companies have to be broken up. You know, these are absolute monopolies, and this is about a total concentration of power, which is absolutely inimical to the democratic process. And they're actually, you know, there is some things in play, but that should not be a conversation. This, you know, this should be lawmakers making law on behalf of citizens, not in conversation with the companies, I think, in that sense.
I mean, one challenge I find in that, having tried to do some diplomacy around government and tech, is that governments often just feel they don't have the knowledge of how tech works and how fast tech is moving. They also find that a lot of the talent gets hoovered up by the tech companies. So you turn up and you're completely outgunned in a negotiation. By the way, I think I have a confession to make. I think I was there for that meeting with Biden, between Biden and Nick Clegg. So I apologize for that. Actually, just on Parler. You know, I'm always saying to people, I was always saying to people, diplomats about Twitter, you know, there are big risks to go on it, but the biggest risks are not to engage in the argument. You've got to get stuck in and roll your sleeves up and be there. Should we all be joining Parler in order to take on these arguments, Carole?
I don't know. It's going
to. Or is it just, you know, Twitter's exhausting enough?
A lake of sewage, isn't it? Because this anything goes. So, you know, Twitter's already can be, you know, difficult to navigate. Certainly I sort of have, you know, a lot of you know, there's a lot of, you know, bile, misogyny, all the rest of it. I think it's going to be that power of 10. So, but yeah, I mean, that is going to be the thing though. I mean, I think essentially if that does happen, if Trump does get booted off, if he does go to Parler, then it is going to sort of make that into, people are going to pay attention to it, I guess, in a way, and that is going to bring the rest of us sort of to rubberneck. But I really don't want to think about that at the moment.
Okay, let's keep the positive spirit for now. Josh.
I was just going to jump in on that quickly, which is I think that there is some upside to that dynamic, which is it does give us an opportunity to separate the wheat from the chaff a little bit, right? That one of the challenges of Trump having such a huge presence on Twitter is that it made it difficult to basically say, oh, Twitter is all bad, because you'd have people who'd say, well, no, you know, you've got career ambassadors that are using Twitter in a really creative way, or you've got people in other countries who are using Twitter to sort of give voice to their democratic impulses or to fight for, you know, equality or democracy. And you had sort of a mixed bag. But if you get to a place where you sort of separate out the wheat from the chaff, that doesn't mean that all the bad things are going to leave Twitter. There's still going to be a lot of that. But if you take out the worst parts of Twitter and separate it off to its own thing, then our system will be able to handle it differently. And we'll be able to segregate those things a little bit better. It's not going to be great, but there is an advantage to having many of those voices that Trump gave such prominence to be segregated onto a different platform. It makes it a little easier for us as a society to deal with them.
What about Josh? Do you think arguably though it's just going to sort of increase the filter bubble effect, which is we're just going to have the right-wing voices over here and the progressive voices over here, and they're not going to hear what each other are saying, and this polarization process continues?
You might, but I think the thing that we have to get in terms of the political health of our country, we have to separate this idea between conservatism and Trumpism. And maybe this is the kind of thing that, I don't think this is the only thing that's going to be required, but maybe you can start to see that, where you see some voices on the right who see all of the misogyny and bigotry and incitement of violence and basically say, I don't really want to be a part of that conversation. I don't agree with liberals on much, but at least we can have a conversation that's based on fact and mutual respect. So again, I don't want to overstate this. I think that this is the solution to our problems. I guess what I'm saying is, I think that there is more good than bad that comes out of sort of separating Trump from all these things. Because I think in some ways that was what was so dangerous about Trump, was that he basically was able to hijack, what I'll say is a legitimate platform, and introduce so much more and turbocharge the bile that flowed onto it. You're not going to make it all of it go away, but segregating that out will allow us to deal with it as a political system and as a society, I think, a little bit better. And even a small improvement would be good news, given the current state of affairs.
There may be a risk if we basically make Parley the place, where everyone on Twitter feels that the deplorables have gone to have an argument somewhere else. It becomes almost, we're having a debate in the bar, and then that's the kind of alleyway around the back of the pub where everyone's actually having a fight. I want to come to Patrick on where the UK fits into all this, and I'm going to try and do that without using the word special relationship any more than it has already been used over recent years. But just a sort of thought experiment here. So imagine you're still sat there in the embassy in Washington. I'm still sat there in number 10. Josh is now in the White House with President Biden, and Carole is watching us all from the media very closely to see what the dynamic is between the Boris Johnson administration and the Joe Biden administration. Patrick, what's your advice to Boris Johnson and number 10 on how to handle this transition and how to handle a new administration?
Thanks, Tom. Before I do that, can I just jump in on the tech thing, because I think this is, I mean, Carole and Josh are much better experts than I am, but as a lay observer, having been in the US, and
we just lost you there, Patrick. We've just we lost you there. Are you back on audio?
Is it better if I'm on audio?
Yes, we've got you there.
Getting me on?
So we just lost you. You were just saying, okay, on tech, there was a layer.
Yeah, I mean, on tech, I think I don't see a way through this unless the big social media and tech companies are made to take responsibility for their content. So I absolutely take Josh's point. I think in a way, it's better if you segregate off some of the worst parts of this, and it's then it's easier to deal with. But the fundamental issue of the propagation of lies, myths, truths, mudslinging, and so on, which is infecting our democracy in a very unhelpful way, to say the least, is not going to stop until those platforms take responsibility for content. And that is a massive ask in any of any government around the world, but maybe particularly so in the US, where the attachment to the freedom of speech is so fundamental to the American system. So it's a challenge, but it needs to be done. But on your question about advising the Johnson government on how to handle the transition, I think it would be quite straightforward, actually, and that is, you're right to steer away from the phrase "the special relationship," because it's overused and it makes us look needy and all those things that are not helpful. But it is fair to say the relationship between the UK and the US is unlike any other relationship between two countries on the planet. And that's not just about government, although it is about the historic relationship we have with the US. It's about every walk of life. It's about the educational links. It's about the cultural links. It's about the societal links. So it is a relationship of a different order. But when it comes to working with the new Biden administration, I believe, and Josh will have comment on this, I'm sure, but it's about what we bring to the table. It's as straightforward as that. We have a relationship like no other and all that history, but unless we bring something to the table that helps the US and is in our mutual interests, we will quite quickly be sidelined. So if Brexit, no matter what your position on Brexit, if Brexit makes it harder for us to bring things to the table for the US as the bridge into the European community or whatever that might be, Washington is going to call Merkel and Macron first if Washington believes they can deliver. So our historic relationship and the breadth of that relationship will get us so far, and that's a great asset, and we shouldn't underplay it. But actually, we will be judged on what we bring to the table. That's the most important, I think.
And so here I am then in number 10 saying, well, thank you, Embassy in Washington, but So what do we bring to the table? The Prime Minister wants an early visit to Washington. He wants to be seen on the lawn with the new president. He wants the new president to come and visit the UK before going to Ireland or to Paris or Berlin. What do we bring to the table at the moment when we're slightly distracted?
Yeah. It's there are some things we bring to the table anyway, and actually will be even easier with a Biden administration, and that's in the sort of military and security sector, where the way that Britain and America cooperate like no other two countries is important for our national security, and it's a mutual interest. So that is an element of the relationship that we have to a level that others do not. So we're always going to be able to bring that. But when Biden begins to face his first international crisis or challenge, or when he needs us to help shift China on climate change or deal with further instability in the Middle East or whatever, we're going to have to come to the table, and we're going to have to bring something to what the US is looking for. And if we are so distracted by issues at home and by ongoing challenges over Brexit, that's going to be more difficult to do. And we get and number 10 is going to have some difficult questions to answer about where it puts its priorities. But if we're going to maintain that relationship with the US, we're going to have to bring something to the table.
Okay, so I've got that package then, and I now go to Josh in the White House, or knowing the Biden administration as Downing Street, and say, well, look, we want a load-bearing relationship with a serious country. We've got credible alliances in Europe and elsewhere. We're going to host a conference on climate change soon, and of course, the security-military relationship is very important. We said pretty much all of that actually at the beginning of the Obama administration. I think I have to, looking back on it, I think it's fair to say that Barack Obama didn't necessarily see it that way. It took a little bit of time before perhaps he saw the breadth of that relationship, particularly the security-military bits of it. Is it going to be easier to convince Joe Biden to take the UK seriously?
Well, I think Patrick is such a more sophisticated, and you are, based on your experience, more sophisticated analyst of this. But here's my instinct is this: in the same way that Obama was a little cautious about engaging with our close allies because of the way that they had established a working relationship with the Bush administration in executing some foreign policy priorities that the incoming President Obama did not share, particularly with regard to the war in Iraq. So there was some baggage that, or maybe some underbrush that had to sort of be cleared out. And President Obama had to see for himself that there was a willingness to move beyond that and to engage on other issues where there was much clearer alignment. And I think in some ways, you've got the same kind of dynamic in place here too, where there was sort of some political chumminess between the current prime minister and the outgoing US president. And President Biden will assess for himself the ability of the prime minister to sort of clear out that underbrush and demonstrate a genuine commitment to advancing some shared priorities. All of the national security and foreign policy priorities, I think, is the most natural way to begin to, on a substantive basis, evaluate our ability to sort of strengthen our relationship again. But I also think, Tom, that there's going to be an opportunity that's not exactly clear yet, but will be early next year around the global economy. And to what extent can the United States and the UK cooperate on mobilizing a global economic response to repair what is a badly wounded global economy, and a global economy that's only going to further weaken as we go through what promises to be a really difficult winter. And so next spring, to what extent is the US and UK able to cooperate and mobilize resources to address the challenges facing the global economy? That would be the next area, I think. And that is going to raise some questions around the way that the Johnson government prioritizes their economic policy making. And are they willing to set some priorities that are shared by the incoming Biden administration to address the weaknesses of the global economy? And if they do, those two things, sort of national security, foreign policy, and international economic policymaking, I do think could lay a strong foundation for a very effective working relationship between the two countries and the two governments.
That is interesting. So actually, that is a rerun of the playbook that we went through with Barack Obama first time round, actually, where it was actually the global economic crash and then the G20 and trying to develop the alliances and the sense that we were competent on economic issues that then became the load-bearing bit of the relationship.
Yeah, and remember, there was all this talk, particularly in Germany, about austerity. And it was really important that we had a strong partner in the UK who could make the case to us for a stronger fiscal response that ultimately was pretty important to the recovery of the global economy over time.
Yeah. And Carole, so you see, this is like it's quite cathartic, actually. I'm not even going to ask Patrick about the state visit for Trump and whether that is now part of a big part of the problem that we'll have with the incoming administration, having rolled out a bit too much gold for President Trump when he came to the UK a couple of years ago. But Carole, I know this isn't your angle on the media, but will we ever get to a point in the UK where your colleagues in the media will sort of give us a bit less angst about, does the American president still like us? Or are we destined to always have this sort of back and forth where we're either worried that they're ignoring us or we're worried that we're too close with nothing much in between?
I suppose it's kind of like, it's an interesting framing, isn't it? Is that they are they're the sort of cool kid who we want to be friends with. And it's fascinating hearing your talk because, of course, you've got to bring real expertise to this, whereas I am just a total lay outsider. But your question you're asking is that we have to bring something to the table. Well, what? I mean, it's this, we're a tiny nation. We're going to be adrift from the European trading bloc. What do we bring to the table? And as you say, I mean, it's they're really the only thing you can think of is like the Five Eyes security relationships. But I just don't see it, and it feels that maybe this is one friendship that we need to just let go of, and that we are no longer the special playmate, and that America maybe will move on to better pastures. But sorry, that's just.
So I feel duty bound. I feel my old world calling me here to say that we are a permanent 5 member of the UN Security Council. We're a key member of NATO. We're one of the few countries that spends 2% on defence, and still, as of today, 0.7% on development. And we have one of the best diplomatic services in the world and a very effective military and special force. So there's lots there, Carole. I just have to.
Right, I'm good. That's all in hand then. Okay.
It's all fine. And also, I do think that, I don't know if Patrick and Josh agree or not, but I do think that there is this opportunity around hosting the climate change conference next year, where basically Biden is going to need to do something big on climate change. You can only do that with partners and with alliances. And maybe if he has to go through a few months of sort of nation therapy at home, he'll emerge towards the end of next year needing something big on the world stage. And at that point, the UK pops up hosting a conference on an issue where I think we actually agree. I mean, on climate change. Does that work, Josh? Does that help to fill some of that space?
I think it does. And I think there is a really good opportunity there. And I hope that people are thinking now about how to capitalize on it, both on a substantive basis in terms of really making some progress on climate change, but also in service of strengthening the relationship between our two countries. The other thing I would add, Tom, to your sort of drawing on your history about the relationship between our countries, Trump was an enormously destructive force in our politics here in the United States, but also with regard to our relationships around the world. But he was not able to tear down generations of cooperation at the diplomatic level, at the military level, at the intelligence level. That yes, he was toxic and some of that was eroded. But there really is a strong base of support that when there is a problem to go and solve around the world, the United States does want to look to our partners and our closest allies. And there is a history of our ability to cooperate to solve those problems. And we have a base on which to build there. The other thing, Tom, that I think that's important not to overlook, and I say this now as somebody who's no longer in government, is now sort of in the corporate world. There are strong corporate ties between our two countries, that there are US businesses here in the United States that have strong interests in London and the UK. And that is another reason for the Biden administration to make that relationship a priority. I work at United Airlines now here in the United States. And the biggest news that we've made this week is, introducing customer COVID testing overseas. And what's the route that we chose to sort of pioneer this customer COVID testing is between Newark Airport, just outside New York City, and London Heathrow. That in some ways is in of itself an indication that when you, even at a corporate level, when we think about who our important partners are around the world, the strong ties economically between the United States and the UK can remain important, even if, even in a Brexit world. And that is also a platform on which to build further strengthen the relationship between our two countries, and why it will remain a priority.
Yeah, I hope you're right, Josh, but I also feel I should say, the world that America left at the end of the Obama administration is not the world you're coming back into now. As you try to switch the lights back on in the shining city on a hill, there's a lot of therapy you'll need to go through at home to try and bring America back together again. But I think there'll be a certain amount of therapy you'll need to do with allies who, to use Carole's metaphor, who've gone off to play with someone else, or who look around and feel that.
There's no denying that. I think my point is we're not starting from scratch.
Yeah. So we have to hope that the fundamentals are still solid enough that they haven't been too badly vandalized in these last 4 years. How about you, Patrick? Where do you stand on that? Do you think can we rebuild those international systems that Donald Trump basically orphaned when he came into office? We may have lost Patrick there.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Carole.
Which is that, so the other way around is, do you think that the change of administration in the US is going to have a chastening effect and a behavioural effect upon Boris Johnson? Because in the way that Donald Trump gave permission for this sort of strongman behaviour, this denial of reality, the lying, the disinformation, etc., do you think now that this is going to have a ripple out effect that Biden is essentially going to sort of lift up the modes of behaviour? And do you think that there's an incentive now, at least, as also for Johnson to act in a more decent fashion because there is a trade deal to negotiate apart from anything else?
I think, yeah, short answer, yes. I do think, I've watched in Number 10 and seen just the way that with different presidents, when you change the style and tone of governing, UK prime ministers often tack in that direction a bit. It's a very human thing. When you meet someone, you're looking for points of commonality. You're looking for ways to align with them. You're looking for things you have in common. And so I think, and the US presidency is such a sort of magnetic force on UK prime ministers that I do think that you'll see a sense that we need a more competent style, where we need to show the world that we're starting to rebuild this sort of treble A rating for knowing how to do things in a quiet and unflashy and hopefully without too many metaphors kind of way. Straightforward. I think the way to rebuild that relationship is within an incoming administration is, as Patrick says, to be sort of fairly competent and quietly effective, and offering advice on serious issues that matter to President Biden, and not trying too hard to rush after the new president, and not trying to be too flashy and sort of soundbitey. But Patrick, what do you reckon?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think I'm back. No, I agree with you on that, and I think I think the arrival of Biden and Kamala Harris in Washington will sort of see Boris Johnson have to adapt his behaviour a little bit, certainly internationally and certainly in that relationship. And I think he will be getting very, very clear advice now that playing the sort of the jocular buffoon type sort of archetypal, stereotypical sort of bumbling British guy, semi-aristocratic guy, is not going to wash with the new American administration. And if he wants to a trade deal, as Carole mentioned, or anything else, then he's going to have to be more professional in his approach. But on your question about sort of the impact of Joe Biden on the international sphere and the world having changed quite a lot in 4 years, I personally think this is the area which will be the sort of easiest bit for Joe Biden, actually. I mean, he's committed to rejoining the Paris Accord. He's going to rejoin the WHO. He will be more attracted to alliances like NATO and others than adversaries like Putin and Xi. And so I think, that there will be a righting of the ship in that sort of international sphere in a way that will have quite a profound impact quite quickly. Now, how long it takes back to get to the pre-Trump era in its entirety is an open question. I don't know the answer to that. It's not going to be all plain sailing, but I think there's an opportunity to shift that quite quickly, and it's probably explains why it took the Chinese quite some time to congratulate Biden on his victory, for example, because they're obviously having conversations internally in Moscow and Beijing and elsewhere, thinking, what does this mean for us and how do we respond to this? So I think that's positive. Where I think things are much more difficult are at home for the US, in a highly divided society, and actually achieving the sort of political and economic reforms that America really needs to make if it's to continue to thrive as a nation, and get rid of the sort of kindling that is fueling this sort of growing division in America. I think that's much more difficult, and as I said before, is going to be so distracted by responding to COVID and then rebuilding the economy afterwards that I fear that some of those bigger issues won't be tackled, and that sets America up for may not be Trump again, but new Trumps and populists in the future who can play on American fears and divisions in a way that Trump has very successfully been able to do.
Now, thank you. I've got hundreds of questions and not that much time. So I'm going to give you like a sort of Lebanese meal, Lebanese meze. I'm going to just throw some questions out, and then you can decide between you which ones you want to take on. There's one from Marcus Wigan in Australia, who studied physics at Harvard in 1960, about trust. Maybe this is for Carole. Has trust been destroyed too much really between governments and those they govern now? And in the internet age, is it still possible to govern effectively? There's one, actually, I'm going to combine from Raymond Chadwick and Jeremy Dawkins around reform of the Electoral College. Coming back to Patrick's point, has this election shown once and for all that the US electoral model is basically broken and needs to be rebuilt? Question from James Hawes, inevitably we haven't discussed it yet, but on the trade deal, famous UK-US trade deal, are we basically at the back of the queue, as Barack Obama once suggested, or are we going to get the hugest, most beautiful, most gold trade deal the world's ever seen, as Donald Trump once suggested? What's left of the trade deal? And then there's another question really about US politics, maybe for Patrick, given his book around how the Democratic Party, or maybe for Josh actually in this context, reconnect with those blue collar voters that went off and voted for Trump. When you think back, Hillary Clinton's last rally when she was playing Bon Jovi, Living on a Prayer, and it was all about Gina and Tommy, and of course Gina and Tommy had gone off and voted for Donald Trump. So how does Biden get Gina and Tommy to and the other 70 million to come back to the Democratic Party? That is a mixture of questions. Who would like to go on any of those? Carole's got a microphone on, so it has to be Carole then.
Oh no!
Sorry.
So I mean, I think the question about trust is so interesting, and I think we are, as I said, I think we're in a really, really difficult place where the basic norms have broken down. There is no established set of truths anymore. We've seen it in order, evidence-based reporting has been attacked and debased and is not trusted anymore. Evidence-based science has undergone the same process. And so we're in this situation where there is just not a universally agreed set of facts anymore. And I think it puts us in a really, really difficult position going forward. And, this is why I do come to that, this isn't, I think a lot of people when they hear, this sort of like questions about tech or about platforms, it still feels like it's very niche or it's not to do with them. But I really think that the way we have to think about this is there is an information crisis. In the same way we had to change our language around climate to be a climate crisis. Well, this crisis around the distribution of information is absolutely foundational to everything else. And we can't actually tackle any of these other problems until we really look at this and try and come up with solutions here. Because you're right, Biden is coming in and he's got to deal with COVID. He's got to deal with the economy. He's got to deal with climate, but he can't when you're in this situation where there are no established facts. People just believe, don't believe in the destruction of the ice caps, etc. So for me, it really is the one thing which really deserves our focus, because I think without this, then all of these other issues are impossible to solve, actually.
Tom, do you want me to jump in?
Yeah.
I mean, I totally agree with Carole on this. I think she's absolutely right. I think I fear that because of all the other things that Biden and our own government have got to deal with, that dealing with the sort of information crisis will be further down the list than it should be, which plays into our ability to deal with all the other things. But in a way, that should be front and center because it so frames everything we do now. But on the other question, so the reform of the Electoral College, Josh, I'm sure will have views. From my perspective, I think it's the biggest gerrymandering there is in the US, and there's quite a lot of gerrymandering in the US system. So it should be changed, but it's incredibly hard to bring that about. It needs constitutional reform, and that requires 2/3, I think, of both houses of Congress, and then goes out to 3/4 of the states to be endorsed. And if you're a Republican looking at this and seeing that basically the Democrats win the popular vote pretty much every time, it's highly unlikely that you're going to vote to change that system that allows you to get into office. So it probably relies on waiting for demographic changes in states like Georgia and elsewhere that may bring sort of a rebalancing, but it's a problem, and I think it should be dealt with, but I question whether it will or not. On the UK-US trade deal, I think it comes back to the conversations we've been having about how Boris Johnson approaches the new administration, what he brings to the table, and how he gets down to the nitty-gritty of that trade deal. I think overall Joe Biden will want a trade deal with us. I mean, we had TTIP and all that, and we worked very hard before that went off the rails. And so I think there is a desire to have a deal on both sides of the Atlantic, but it's a negotiation. And the US will want something in return for allowing the UK to have privileged access to its markets, and that means compromise for the UK. And the one that everybody focuses on here is food safety, of course, which is a massively politically sensitive for good reason, and so it's going to be difficult. So I don't think that will be quick. The other question on how does the US reconnect with blue-collar workers, I don't think that just applies to the US. I think it applies to the UK too, and it plays into Brexit and how we got to that outcome. I just don't think people in the centre or on the left of politics have yet worked out how to a narrative that appeals to people who feel they're being left behind by a rapidly changing society, whether that's the white working class in America or the American evangelicals who feel that a more diverse society is a threat to them. And until mainstream politicians can respond to that in a way to say, you are a part of the future. You're not going to be left on the scrap heap of history because you were working in blue collar jobs and don't have a job anymore, that you're part of that future and we are part of the solution. I think there's a real problem, and populists fueled by social media will be able to stir that up and challenge our systems for as long as we haven't dealt with that.
A number of the questions coming in exactly on that theme. Tony Cox saying the 71 million aren't just going to fade away. Jeremy Bentham saying basically, how do you deal with this issue of creating more winners from the current move towards more globalization and more automation, while better protecting those left behind? So that big inequality challenge. In the midst of all this, Josh, does Joe Biden have an answer to this? I mean, he was the candidate to go out and get those voters.
Yeah, look, I think the reason that to try to draw some optimism out of this, which I recognize is difficult in the very challenging environment that both Carole and Patrick have laid out, which I agree with 100%, by the way, is that Joe Biden is, I think he would acknowledge, is not the person that you would draw up, not the candidate that you would draw up on paper to galvanize and energize an historic number or a historically large population of American voters in the midst of a global pandemic. But yet he did succeed in doing that. And he did succeed in doing that in a variety of ways by building the kind of coalition that we will eventually need to find our way out of this. That he was able to win over Trump voters in many communities around the country. And he was also able at the same time to stimulate historic turnout in many diverse communities as well. That's not true across the board, but there are pockets where that is undeniably true. Now, what's also true at the same time is that Trump, in a way that he did not do in 2016, was able to further motivate millions of Americans who had not previously been all that politically active and get them to turn out and vote and support him and Republicans down the ballot. So that is undeniably true, but there is an element of what Joe Biden was able to do in the election that is at least part of the puzzle that we'll need to find our way out of this crisis. But I like the way that Carole set this up as an information crisis. I think it's true. My old boss, President Obama, is on sort of a mini media tour right now as he's hawking his memoir that's out that went out yesterday, I guess. Or maybe it's today, actually. He's doing so much press, I'm not even sure which day.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
But the way that he set up this argument is, if you take the issue of climate change, you can have a legitimate debate with somebody around the idea that, look, climate change is already too far gone. We'll never get the Chinese and the Indians and others to substantively cooperate enough to actually fight climate change. So we should really focus our efforts on climate mitigation. And then we can have a debate around the wisdom of that. But when the person on the other side of the table is not saying, oh, climate change is real, but there's not that much we can do about it. If they're just saying there's no such thing as climate change, it's a Chinese man-made hoax, well, where do you start the conversation? And that is the crux of the challenge. And that is true on a whole range of healthcare issues. That's true as we deal with COVID. That is true as we talk about economic inequality. And that is, I think, the question that we have to resolve. And the other, again, as we try to find a strand of optimism here, one possible strand of optimism is that whether we wanted to or not, we have all gotten a crash course on sort of being able to discern information in a crowded, fast-moving media environment. And I'm not being Pollyanna-ish here. Not everybody has passed the test, right? Even if we're just grading pass-fail here, there are a whole bunch of people who have failed. But hopefully over time, what we will see is that people will be more sophisticated consumers of information that they read online. And can they do a better job of separating out truth from fiction? Can they do a better job of understanding what is nuanced and complicated and true, and what is hyped up and transparently intended to play on the anxieties and insecurities of people? And how can we just do a better job of processing this information as we engage in a debate as a society? And that is why having a younger generation of Americans who grew up in a digital era, who are digital natives, become more politically active, that helps a lot. And even people who are not digital natives, to what extent have they spent the last 4 years of the Trump administration concluding that, you know what, maybe I can't believe everything that I read online. And that education will serve us well. And so the question I think in my mind is, this is another ask that we can have of tech companies. You figured out how to get people to sign on for a Twitter account. You figured out how to get people to sign up for a Facebook account. How can you now also help us figure out as a society to help people become better users of those products? And at the end of the day, it is in their own financial interest to do that. It is not in the interest of the founders of Twitter to have this reputation of just being a channel of bile. It is not in the interest of Mark Zuckerberg and the board of directors at Facebook to be a punchline at the Democratic convention like they were when Julia Louis-Dreyfus famously went on at the last day of the Democratic convention and said that it was important for the Democratic Party to mobilize because Trump had Vladimir Putin, Fox News, and Facebook on his side. That is not something that the Facebook executives believe is a path to financial success. So how do we get them to channel their financial impulses, their profit-making impulses in a way that actually makes their users and their community that they like to describe it as more constructive and more sophisticated at using their platform in a way that also has benefits for our society and our political system as well?
So I want to come in on this issue about how we help develop young people to think in that critical way. We've got a series running at the moment on 21st century skills. So we've done how to negotiate, we've done how to protect your privacy, we're going to do how to break glass ceilings. And given that we keep asking Carole to come and do things for us, I can't ask her to come back again in a few weeks' time to do how to think critically. But Carole, given that we've got lots of students watching, in fact, one of them has just shared this great quote from Tocqueville: America's most exceptional quality is its capacity for self-repair, which is quite an encouraging note. Given we've got the students with us tonight, Carole, how would you encourage that generation to think critically, to approach these issues that Josh has described in a way that can sift reason and fake news?
I mean, I think you need to act politically, is what I think. It's more than act critically, think critically in this, because I do not think that it should be the burden of individuals. And I also think that that what is happening online is really difficult to pass. It's incredibly sophisticated, and a lot of it is invisible, actually. And so for an individual, the burden is too much. And this is where the pressure must be on the companies, and that can only come from governments, from politicians. So that, I feel, is where sort of like, if young people want to have an impact here, it's that they should not be having to sort of to pass this garbage from, what is actually, evidence-based science and reporting and all the rest of it. And I would encourage them to vote, to step up, to organise, because it is, I mean, I think so increasingly we see in so many ways, it is up to, I think this thing about I think for me, where the hope and the optimism and the positivity comes from is about us understanding that we are citizens, so that as well as being the principal of Hertford College, as well as being a diplomat, you are also a citizen, and you do have this sort of civic duty, and that protecting our democracy, strengthening these processes is kind of down to us, because we have been let down. These companies do have too much power. We are in this position of incredible vulnerability. So yes, that's me.
So I'm very glad you used that exact phrase, because one of the themes that we're putting at the centre of the Hertford 2030 strategy is how do we develop ourselves as good citizens. So thank you for that bit of coordination that we did backstage earlier on. So I've got time for one more question, and I'm going to put the same question into all of you, which is who will be Joe Biden's successor, and what will be the defining issue on which they run? Ooh, who wants to have a crack at that first?
Not me.
Sounds like a question for Josh.
Josh, you went like...
Trump's successor. Can we not have that one as well? Or is
Which one?
Who's the new Trump?
Oh, okay, you can have that one as well. That can be part B.
Throw that out as well.
Well, so I guess I'll take the first crack at both of these. Why don't we start with the bad news first? There clearly is, there's a decent chance that the next Trump is a guy named Donald Trump. I think it is very likely, or I say it's viable that he keeps a high profile long enough and makes a lot of noise about running again in 2024. And I'm sure that there is nothing that he would like more than being able to, jump back onto center stage. So I think that is possible. I actually think the thing I would, as an American citizen, the thing I would be more concerned about is somebody who has seen Trump's political success to play on, the kind of insecurities and vulnerabilities and grievances of a certain segment of the U.S. population. But that person is also somebody who is more disciplined, is more strategic, is somebody that has a story about their life, a biography, a background that allows him or her to more naturally tell that story. And that is something I'm concerned about. When it comes to sort of Biden's successor, I think there is a not insignificant chance that Biden does choose to run again for re-election. And I think it will not be easy to persuade him that he should not do that after what we've all gone through. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think the most optimistic, so I'll try to end on an optimistic note here. The most optimistic outcome is that you have a President Biden that runs for re-election in 2024 and runs on a platform of competence that basically says, this thing has been a huge mess and here's what I fixed. We got COVID under control. We got a vaccine distributed. We repaired our economy. We began to fix our relationships around the world. We began to make progress on diversity. And we restored some level of competence all across the US government in a way that has been good for the country. That may not lead him to an historic landslide win, but if things go well, it's easy to see how we are in a place where after some twists and turns through his first 4 years, where he does win re-election in 2024 on a platform like that. Again, it may be that I am so influenced by my own experience in government, because I think that path that I'm describing is pretty similar to the path that President Obama had to chart during his first 4 years in office. So I may be so biased and have such a perspective that it's hard for me to impartially address this question, but that to me would be a really good outcome that I think that I certainly would feel good about.
So we wait until 2028 for you to run. Earnest 2028 has a nice ring to it. How about you, Patrick? What's your prediction? Where are you putting your money?
I wish I hadn't.
We're going to sell a lot of books on the back of this conversation. So where are you going to put all that?
I wish I hadn't let Josh go first now, because it's quite hard to follow. I think let's do the second question first, Carole's question, and who will be on the Republican side. And I think you definitely can't rule out what Josh said. And if it's not Donald Trump, it could be a Trump on the ticket. There are plenty others of them out there who have political aspirations, it seems. And if you're a Republican looking for a winning ticket, you've seen the formula and it works. And so why not? The very fact that it seems to be taking Republicans a very long time to distance themselves from Donald Trump when he's lost an election, I think would suggest that many would be able to support a Trump-like figure again if the opportunity arose. On the Democratic side, I think most people are saying that Biden wouldn't stand again given his age, but Josh may well be right. If he doesn't, I think it's you often ask these things in embassies, like who's going to be the next president, and it's a fool's errand to even try a guess at this, because just the way the American political system works, it's not like the UK. So you can have 19, 20 people in the primary process, and who knows which way it's going to end up. Those politicians don't necessarily build careers over years before getting the top job. They can appear somewhat out of nowhere, at least from an international perspective. So I think what I was asked on an earlier discussion I was on was, did I think America was ready for Kamala Harris if she did become the nominee in 4 years' time? And that's a really difficult question to answer. I mean, is America ready to, America in such a polarized state, is it ready to elect a woman as president and a black woman as president? I don't know. And it comes back to my point about how progressives, people on the center left, have got to reach out to people who feel left behind by a rapidly changing world. And unless the left can reconnect with those people, those white blue collar workers and evangelical Christians and so on, then I think it's quite a stretch to see someone like Kamala Harris winning the presidency. Or notwithstanding how brilliant she is, I think she's incredibly impressive, and I think she has a massive role in the future of the Democratic Party, and I think will be a great vice president alongside Joe Biden. But I'm not yet convinced America's ready to take that step, unfortunately, of voting for her, even though I think she'd do a fantastic job.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And obviously, one caveat on your comment earlier on about clownish buffoonery, that you weren't actually applying that to any one political leader in the UK. It's a more general, just in case our friends at Number 10 are watching at this moment. Or maybe you were.
I was applying it to one particular leader, as it happens.
And Carole, then, what about 2024, 2028? Who's your money on?
The only thing I was just thinking about was that there's this very striking scene at the beginning of, there's a great book by Jane Mayer called Dark Money, which is about where the real power in US politics lies amongst the billionaire class. And we've seen absolutely the tentacles of that stretching over the Atlantic, the way that they've created these kind of institutions and think tanks. And we've also, it's absolutely going on here. But anyway, at the beginning of Dark Money, she describes this scene in the desert. I think it's in Palm Springs, and it's on the day of Obama's inauguration. And I think, America, there was this, sort of celebration of the first Black president, and, this historic moment. She has this scene of the cars cruising through the desert into this billionaire's home to discuss, as an emergency meeting, of like the re-election. This must start here, that we cannot allow this, and we must work. This is day one to getting our guy into the presidency. So I think the thing that I just think about is, it doesn't really, in some ways, it's not the candidate, it's the system. And it's the fact that there is going to be this hugely concerted, there's a lot of people who are going to be very, very disaffected, who do feel that this election was stolen in some way. Their guy is out on his ear. And, a lot of huge business interests and oligarchic interests as well. And so I think that's the thing that I really fear, is that the, amassing of money and data, and the cleverer and cleverer ways that is spent to manipulate people invisibly with no protections whatsoever. I think that's the thing which I just sort of feel, I don't know, at this moment in time is the sort of real danger going forward, more so than who it will be.
Just breaking up again, Patrick. Do you want to just switch to audio?
Yep, is that better?
Yeah.
I was going to just random fact for what Carole said. I don't have 2020 figures yet for spending on the US presidential election, but in 2016, the US spent over $1 billion on the election of the president and the Senate and House of Representatives. That's 80 times more than we spend on a general election in the UK, and in the than he is critical in determining the future of the US. I think the spending in 2020 was much higher. So that money is perverse system of the US system in a way that if it doesn't stop, as Carole said, who stands and who is elected, it's just as much to do with where the money is coming from, the individual themselves here.
Now, I'm conscious of everyone's time, and this has been an absolutely brilliant conversation. Thank you so much to the three of you, Carole, Josh, Patrick. I mean, absolutely brilliant. We could have gone on for much longer, and I see way more questions coming in. So my huge apologies to everyone who asked questions that we didn't get to. If you want to ping them to us on Twitter, there's a chance that people may still respond. We did finish on a quite pessimistic note, this sort of sense that maybe Donald Trump isn't just a sort of a passing storm, but it's something more akin to climate change, and that the US may continue to be an exporter of problems rather than necessarily an exporter of solutions in the future. It may continue to be the kind of country that used to try to fix. We've also talked a lot about the delusions that exist often in the UK about the special relationship, about the nature of this relationship, maybe in the US sometimes about the kind of world that is out there waiting for America as it returns to global leadership. But I think on the positive note, we at least are in a new phase where, as we started, when we're talking about some of the social media aspects of this, the sort of rhetoric, the sort of language that Trump has used, which would not just get him kicked off Twitter, but it would get him kicked out of any UK cabinet, even the current one, now does become, we have to hope, more marginalized. And we move from this idea of leadership, which is all about only I can fix this, to moving back to this style of leadership, which is about, yes, we can, again. And then maybe the optimistic note, because there is this dark place, and Carole has described it better than anyone really out there at the moment, where inequality meets technology meets sort of power. And there is a huge challenge for this administration, the US and the UK, in tackling that space. But maybe the positive note to end on is the point that Josh made about this next generation coming through now as Carole said, as good citizens, able to realize the smartphone superpower in their hands and get out there and do something brilliant with it. But for now, thank you so much to everyone who joined us from Hartford College, from the alumni, and from beyond. Thank you for some great questions. But most of all, huge thanks to these three just brilliant panelists, Carole, Patrick, and Josh. And we hope to see you here in person when we're on the other side of this pandemic to welcome you and host you properly. But thank you so much.